ragamuffin keeps striving in every way. International, what they call me international. When me ride palm with them in the move, but the rhythm and I come down crucial. And me ride palm with them and then we sit down steady. Body me on the place, I with the one Jamal ski. We are the general. We sit up on the rhythm and over the mic incredible. I'm be right part of the rhythm, move with the rhythm, I sit down steady. Every ragamuffin you do, I feel rock and follow me. You know you love her for your life. We jump up on the rhythm, make we ride it right. We chat up on the mic and keep it international. Cause anytime we jump on mic, they call we give it a general. What they call me international. When me ride palm with them in the move with the rhythm and I come down crucial. And me ride palm with them and then we sit down steady. Body me on the place, I with the one Jamal ski.
Yes. What is up, everybody? Joshua Casper here with Plugin Boutique, and I've got quite a few special guests today. We've got Nick from NOISIA Ternion Sound. It's Andrew, Jack, and is it Andy?
Eric.
Oh, so close. Gentlemen, for people who don't know, why don't you introduce yourselves and let us know what we're going to be checking out on stream today?
Well, we're Ternion Sound. We're from Minneapolis, Minnesota, USA. We just played a Vision Invites, which is super dope. So we're hanging out here in the NOISIA studios. We're checking out Vision 4X, and we thought it would be fun to pull up some stems from the Digital Artifice album that came out on Vision last October. Yep. So right now we got a track called Intimacy pulled up, but yeah, from what I understand, we're going to be talking about loads of questions and details about the plugin and maybe a little production stuff. So yeah, I don't know if there's a chat that we can see or whatever, but if there is, write things down.
And we absolutely encourage people to at Plugin Boutique with any questions you have. Also, we're going to give away a couple copies of Vision 4X today. So the way we do that is we just have people be active in the chat, and they generally send a ton of questions our way. And Nick, before we move on, what have you been up to post NOISIA?
Nothing. Way too many things. I'm caught up in a lot of projects, which makes some of the working quite slow. But I'm quite proud that I've managed to finish my SleepNet EP, the second EP.
Nice.
Which was a bit of a difficult. It wasn't easy, but yeah, I'm happy that that's finished. That's just out a couple of weeks ago. It came out.
Very nice.
So that's kind of still fresh in my head.
Cool. All right. For the Ternion Sound group, obviously, I mean, we're here to talk about Vision 4X. How were you exposed to Vision 4X? And give me like top line how you use it in your production before we jump in and start getting into the nitty gritty.
Well, you got the most experience with it. I know we've gone through a lot of different visualizers, just trying to for like different reasons and all that kind of stuff.
Well,
But
the thing for me was I used to have three or four different visualizers open when I was mastering. That Vision does all of them. I don't remember what I was using for Spectrum, but I was using like SciScope for the waveform. Maybe Span, I think, or something.
classic.
But we were introduced to it just through you guys, I think.
Yeah.
But primarily what I use it for is using the reference curves and being able to see the EQ frequencies and check them against the curves. And I recorded some of my own reference curves of the album we just did, which is also basically I took 2 bars from each track off of the album and recorded that as a curve and realized that it's suspiciously close to a pink noise curve just now. But yeah, I use that primarily because I'm going deaf, actually, and I have
That'd be a good thing to get into.
Yeah, my right ear, I'm missing 25 dB of volume beneath
wow.
250 hertz.
Whoa.
So I really can't hear low end in my right ear. And then in both ears, I can't hear above 16K anymore. So being able to see that laid out is super useful. I just made a tune the other day that I thought, I was like, oh, this sounds sick. It's totally toasted and just like got the distortion perfect. And I sent it to Andrew and he's like, dude, this is killing me. And I was like, what's wrong with it? And he was like, look at this. Look at the readout. You could just see, like, it's not even in a range where I have problems with my hearing, but 3 to 5K was just like
blasted,
just boosted. And I've realized too, like, some of the frequencies that I like being really harsh are like the ones that everyone else hates. But now I can see it.
Yeah, it led us down a rabbit hole,
nice.
you know?
Yeah.
It was just like, okay, well, do certain genres ask for different things? And then where we're doing the EQ curve presets and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I think that's a lot of the mastering perspective, or like the overall mix perspective, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like it's funny to hear the differences in people's production, like where they put their resonances.
Yeah.
Like you're just saying, like 3 to 5K. There's some producers that I love that tend to also go in that area and just make that appear much more. And I'm a little bit afraid that if everybody uses a pink noise curve here, they're just going to dumb all that down.
Yeah.
So it's good to hear that you're still like just cranking out the resonance.
And I tamed it a little bit, and I was like, that's as far as I'm going to tame it, because if I tamed it too much to fit into a pink noise curve, it loses the character that I like it to have.
Yeah.
So, and then some of the reference curves that I made for other people's tunes that I like are nowhere near the pink noise curve. They're quite bizarre, actually.
Yeah, I think I also experimented with the capture stuff, and it would, the feeling of how much you can use the reference curve for other projects, kind of like it really varies, because sometimes you have one curve that is from a track that sounds really great, but it's got a bunch of bumps and dips, and once you apply that to your own song, it's maybe in a different key, or using very different sounds. So the translation of that is hard. So I'm actually a little bit reluctant to, when I'm starting a new song, to use a captured curve from another track. I tend to start with pink noise because I want to sort of sculpt the track's own resonance curve inside of pink noise, with pink noise as a reference. But then obviously if you're getting close to something, to finishing something or mastering, and you're like, this other track is a really good reference and it comes really close, then it makes more sense to use it. But I find myself using the pink noise most of the time, being quite happy with that. But yeah, it's nice to hear that people are using it, and it's funny to see how crazy, how squiggly the line becomes. And you're like, this sounds full spectrum, this sounds full range. Like, yeah, for sure.
All right, well, let's flip over to the DAW and take a look at what you're talking about. And Nick,
so...
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Before we jump in, I had a question on one of the videos that we did a while back, and it was the person is just starting out with visualizers and they don't even know where to put it in their project. Like, is this on a channel by channel thing? Does this go on a bus or on the master? So can you kind of walk through, I know you already kind of touched on using the pink noise to start, but like where from the jump do you put Vision 4X and what might you use it for when you're just getting started into metering in general?
Well, if you're just getting started, I would say you would probably put it at the end of your master bus. So you just put it on your master bus, and if you have a limiter on the master bus, you'd probably put it after it, just as a last plugin there. And then you run your whole mix through it, and it will tell you, when you solo elements in the. So here, for example, we have these stems, and if I solo something, it's going to run through the master anyway. So if I solo this bass, I'm getting a visualization of just the bass. So you can just put it on your master channel and it will visualize anything you run through it.
Love that.
And that would be a great starting point because you'll start to see everything that you play through there and you start to learn how to read it a little bit.
Nice. Can you move Vision 4X over to the left for me? Because we're kind of obscuring it. Perfect. That's great. Can it get any bigger too? Let's really see it.
I can make it bigger, but then I can't really see the DAW anymore. Like, it's big. But then I press play, and it's just like, okay. I can navigate maybe here, like in this little in between space.
That's all. I mean, that should be enough, Nick. I don't know what the pushback is for here. Yeah, you can make it. I mean, you can make it a little smaller. It was just, there you go. Oh, all right, that's great. That's fine. Over to the left, just a little bit. Come on, help me out. Help me out. Help me.
Okay, I'll put it over here. Then I'll work over here. How's that?
That's a happy middle ground, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we were just playing with these stems, and I think also this track is a really good example. Let me just play it from the drop. Is a good example of why resonances need to be in songs and why using something like this pink noise curve to guide you should come with a few caveats. Because if you look at this song, if I'm playing it,
is that pink noise we're looking at?
Yeah, this is a pink noise reference, and this track is currently, it's not mastered. It's just the stems running through the master, but they're not being limited or anything, and they're not running particularly hot. A little bit hot, but not crazy. But it sounds great. Like all the elements sound great, and the elements are very specific and have their own resonances that are pretty strong. That you can tell from like the way these hats jump up and down. Let's see if I can get a little bit closer to one of the hats. Like if you see, well, this is actually pretty flat, this transient here, but here you can already see that this is bumping up quite a bit, and this is kind of a, you could consider this a nasty resonance. If you're EQing everything out based on this curve, then you would lose character details like in here. So and the same goes for some of these hat transients, or I guess that was a hat transient. The hat transients and the snare transient, they'll momentarily have quite a resonance, but as long as that's momentary, it doesn't really feel like a problem. It's more that when things ring in the high range or in the, hurt your ears range, that you want to use this pink noise curve to rein them in a little bit.
That rim shot hot zone right there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a real intentional thing we do in Ternion Sound, is really want to give a tonality to a rim shot.
Yeah.
So by nature, you have to have that.
Yeah.
Really resonant.
And it's a great way to separate it out into the mix, that it doesn't just sort of have the biggest energy in the low mids where the rest of the bass character is sitting.
How do you do that? Do you do that with by designing the rim shot from scratch, or just by using an EQ?
Mixture. So I try to find a sample that gets close to start with. Though it is funny sometimes to take a rim shot that really just sounds kind of crappy, and then you get to pick where you want your resonance to be using a big bell on an EQ. And it's one of those things that you kind of get away with, even if the EQ rings a little bit, because it's like what you're going to do anyway. I'm going to put reverb on it. I've done it both ways for sure.
I've put in a clean, just a sine wave, at the frequency where I want the quote unquote fundamental to be, and then EQ'd it out of the rim shot sample, and then just like had a volume envelope on the sine wave at that, and then put them both through like compression and saturation, and they get glued together afterwards. But sometimes if the sample is like really bad, like tonally, you know, if that fundamental is not there tonally, just doing that by ear can help.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah, I think I would also grab an EQ in a lot of cases. I love just being a bit ruthless with EQ and EQing in peaks and seeing what they do.
Yeah.
And like Andrew's saying, like it will often ring, but that's kind of what you want. If it's a membrane being struck, it's okay if it actually rings, because a membrane probably would. It's not going to instantly dead the moment you know, when it's not touched anymore.
Gotcha. We got a couple questions if you want to take them.
Sure.
What Venture NW is wondering what the difference is between Vision 4X Lite and the standard, and how does it compare? And then I guess a follow-up question is, how does it compare to something like Isotope RX 11?
The light version. What is the light version? It says that on the store website. The light version is something that Plugin Boutique kind of came up with. So I think that probably has one analyzer only. I think that might not have the full 4 analyzers. But you'd have to look that up on the website, because I wouldn't be able to tell you right now.
Okay.
The difference with Insight, I think, is that the Insight analyzer. Well, I don't want to. Yeah, if I start talking about it, I'm probably going to talk the product down. I don't really want to do that. I think maybe I have Insight somewhere here.
They actually said RX, which it's probably just because you can see the spectrum there, which is, you know, in RX it's a pretty heavy feature too. They're not even asking about Insight specifically.
Oh, RX. Yeah, well, since RX is a standalone app, it doesn't analyze in real time, so that's actually kind of a different category.
Yeah.
It's obviously great to be able to visualize your audio in RX, but if it's already in RX, it means it's a consolidated WAV file, so you can't really use the information live to change what you're doing. That's what I love about 4X and any analyzer that runs live. But there's obviously been a lot of audio editing apps that would have had this spectral visualization already as a static thing, as like as I guess you call it offline, like it's not running live. So that would be a big difference between RX and Vision 4X.
Yeah,
that it's not running live.
It's a completely different animal, I would say, outside of the fact that you can see the spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can, like, I've got Insight here.
Got to move it to the left a little bit for me. There you go.
I don't know if there's many options to change the range of the spectrum here, but you can see that maybe I can't frequency. Yeah. So this is not dissimilar to what we have, except it's not on the grid. This just runs, and Vision 4X sits sync, so you can it'll just refresh your whatever loop range you've got, which I find really useful when you're working on stuff and changing things, that you can just see it update where the change is.
Yeah,
and this
you
is
just
constantly...
did it when you were moving to like the hi-hat, and it's just stuck right there. You can like literally scroll
and that
through
too.
it.
When you freeze it, you can move it around, and then you can see what the analyzer is doing. And one other feature that I love is that it's got the correlation between the analyzers. So when this is playing, this aligns with the waveform beneath it, and that's a big deal. There is a slight offset because of the analysis methods, but you can see, okay, if I have a problem here in my levels where they're going red, then I can go find those resonances here, and you can stop the time and look at where they are, and you can even scroll it. Like now I'm scrolling this past this analyzer, so now you can see, okay, so what's that kick made out of? Okay, so the first transient kind of the knock sits in this range, then it gets a little bit of body down here, and then it like the tail goes there. So it goes, and that sort of being able to zoom in and get a better idea of what was going on and what is going on in sync with your DAW. I think that's a big difference with Insight, and
So-
also the color maps and the way this presents the frequencies is a little bit different. There's obviously an overlap. This looks similar to Insight, but the technology behind it, the algorithm, especially for the low end, is slightly different and does produce different results.
So
I think
the
it's really
ahead.
useful too to have kind of passed over it, but having the spectrum line up with the waveform is huge. If like say I use it all the time where if I'm EQing, like we were saying, a snare or a kick or some kind of really sharp transient sound, oftentimes EQ will change the transient, and you can see that happening in real time.
Yeah.
So you can know, like, if you're boosting a frequency too much or cutting something too much, you might be making the transient hit less in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and if you want, you can get this to sync to MIDI as well, or so that when the sound triggers on MIDI, the analyzer triggers, so that you could use the entire width of the analyzer here to just look at one section of sound. You could have a snare fill this whole thing and constantly re-trigger on the snare.
Yeah, it's really good for drum synthesis sessions.
Yeah.
I had a question. So you were just showing us sort of that bass pitch there. I was actually pushing the spectrum out into the red zone outside of the pink curve. Would you, if you saw that and you were in the mode of mixing this down or mastering, if you were already there, would you tame that, or would you let that go?
No, basically, what my guideline for that is that if it peaks above the line here, it needs to be an element that I want to be dominant in the mix, that I want to be striking, that I want to be like at the top of the levels. But it obviously greatly depends on where it happens and how long it happens. Like if something were to happen around 2K and it would shoot out into the red, even though this is much quieter than that, your ears will perceive it as just as loud. And if it hangs for longer, it will become quite fatiguing or painful potentially. So I would say that I use it apart from bass. I would use I would only allow for red stuff to come through momentarily in transients, but not really stay there. But with bass, you do. Like you can tell here that obviously we have this sub here that is constantly running, and it's constantly going over that curve. Now the curve is obviously a little bit arbitrary. You can also see here that the sub isn't hitting like 0 dB. It isn't the full waveform. So you could go even further momentarily and have it be full level. But because this is quite a constant sub, then you might be like, okay, well, turn it down just a little bit to create some headroom and some dynamics in the sub. But I guess that's what you're looking at, what I'm looking at, the dynamics of the sound. So it can momentarily go red, but if it's got the right dynamics, that's not a problem.
Nice one. We got another question here I think is worth tackling now if you're up for it, from Disconnected Automation. Great username. They're saying, did you see the video on YouTube comparing all of the different analyzers? And there was a little bit of criticism thrown at a lot of them. And if you have any thoughts on it, and maybe if you have seen it, well, have you seen it?
Yeah, I think I know which one you mean.
Perhaps before you jump into your thoughts on it, if you could just give the people who aren't aware of it sort of a summary of the video itself.
I can't do that without being colored. But so it's a video comparing, I think, 4 different analyzers, 2 of which can use a specific algorithm that does a phase crossover or a phase crossover detection thing that creates a much thinner lines in the low end that give a better idea of what pitch something is. I think that's basically what it is. And one of the criticisms for Vision 4X is that if you're looking at this bass, which is a sine wave playing one frequency, that it's kind of hard to tell what note it actually is playing, because this whole thing is red. And if there was a line, you could look at the line, and the readout in the bottom here would tell you exactly what frequency it is. And that is true. This has obviously been stretched out because the musical spectrum is logarithmic, and all these frequencies are very close together, but there's a big audible difference going up from, going up and down here, whereas here that works differently. These frequencies are stacked way closer together. So the analyzer stretches out the visual information in the same way that the analyzer treats it on a logarithmic scale. So these lines become bigger. If this sound were to play down here, it would be the same big red blob. And if this sound would play up here, it would be a much thinner line. That's the point I'm making.
Yeah, it's just resolution, right? Like the resolution at the top is way more condensed.
And the thing is, this shape obviously does have a middle line. You can get the idea of the pitch by finding the middle of the red line, but it's obviously not the easiest to use compared to some of those other analyzers that will have a pitch tracking algorithm that will just sit on a line. But my problem with the pitch tracking algorithm is that as you can see that in the video, is that I don't think they call it a pitch tracking algorithm, but I think it's a pitch tracking algorithm, or I think it acts as a pitch tracking algorithm, because you can tell, for example, when they play a kick drum and the sine wave travels down really fast, that's one sine wave going from high pitch to low pitch very quickly, but it's not. But it's a continuous line, like here, for example. This here is a kick. It's a little bit dirtier, also because the sub is playing under it. But you can see that a kick drum, a sort of powerful frequency, a sine wave, is going down here, and it's not interrupted. It's a line. Now, with that pitch tracking algorithm, the problem is in the analysis video, you see that it starts making all these little lines as if that kick is playing all these little notes in succession. And I think that's because the phase crossover algorithm is trying to read it as pitch information. So I was also very curious to see what that algorithm would do with things like white noise, or like low-end rumble reverbs, like that are impossible to pitch track. How would that visualize it? And I think it would visualize it with lots of clutter that actually don't really pertain to the sound, but that become artifacts of the analysis. And that's all not great, in my opinion. But it obviously still holds that being able to track pitch easier in an analyzer would be very welcome. So you could, for example, overlay that pitch tracking algorithm over the top of this with a different color, so that you can always easily access pitch information if you're curious about that. Or you could endeavor to make the lines just a bunch thinner down here. I personally really like that they're thicker, because it also, to me, represents the sound more. Bass is only a small range, but it's a big part of the energy of your song is in there if you're making dance music. And I like that it's not a thin red line, but that it's a big red line. I just like that.
Big bass.
But I understand the use case for sure for like a thinner line that tracks pitch better.
All right. I think that's a fair response. Couple of notes. One, we've put a link to Vision Lite in the chat if everyone wants to go check it out and see what the differences are. It's also free with any purchase from Plugin Boutique until tomorrow. So if you make a purchase, you can get it for free. Also, we're going to give a couple of copies of the full version away today. Just at Plugin Boutique with your questions, or be active in the chat to win. One last question before letting you move on to your presentation here, Nick. Someone's wondering if you can just show us how to... Yeah, we got a notification there. how to
Yeah, let me-
load up a custom reference curve.
So to do that, you go to this cogwheel in the bottom left. I actually just had to figure it out again because I was loading up some of them from Ternion Sound. So down here on user, you can add a curve and you can load your own curve. So these are the curves that Ternion Sound just gave me. And so if you load one of the curves, you'll see them appear here. And
Our opinion of Alex Perez's best tunes.
Yeah, my opinion specifically.
Yeah.
and then you with right click and shift, you can offset it.
Oh, that's
So
cool.
yeah, and that's I find that especially useful with pink noise, because pink noise, you might want that to move that to the right a little bit, because pink noise can't be as loud as you want it to be. Actual pink noise. Yeah, so here we have a few of those. See how wobbly
Whoa.
that is.
That's distinct. Scurf.
Of course.
But so you ran a bunch of tunes through here, or
Yep.
but only 2 bars of each tune?
I think on the ones I did for other artists, I did like 4 to 8 bars because I wasn't putting in as many tunes. But with our album curve, there's 26 tracks on the album, so I only did 2 bars. Otherwise, I was going to be sitting there for 30 minutes waiting for it to load.
There it is. There's the cheat code. That's digital artifice.
Yeah, but it is cool to see. One of the things that you can tell from just looking at this is that your subs often are more constant, and that if things hit hard here, they are dynamic because the low value is lower here. It's a thicker band, and that's cool to see.
Mhm.
So, for example, if this was a curve of an artist that would compress their top end a lot, have lots of compression in it, then this area would be quite thin. Would be quite thin because the min and max values would come closer together because it's compressed. So that's cool to see that there's like space here, that when you guys use low mid elements, high bass elements, they're quite dynamic because this is quite a thick band. If you compare that to, let's say, Alex Perez, well, he has more dynamics everywhere. His mixes are generally quite dynamic and not particularly squashed.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also tell here that that this part is a little more squashed. Let's see who else. Leo Cap. Huh. Interesting. Interesting. I don't think you reference anything that has very compressed. Well, this is a little thinner.
Yeah.
It's a little thinner here, but very dynamic here, which is interesting.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised by his.
So yeah, so this, I would assume that this part here is just the loudest parts of certain transients that smack, because this 2, 3, 4K, this is quite a painful area if you overdo it there. So, but if a transient happens there, it can be fine as long as it doesn't ring too hard or is too extreme. But I guess this producer's got quite a bit of dynamic range here, quite heavy peaks, but
So,
also
Nick, are you saying if the reference curve line is thicker, there were more dynamics happening for whatever period of time you were taking that snapshot from, and if it's thinner, it's just compressed and hitting the same spot pretty much all the time?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just another way you can see your sound.
Exactly. So with pink noise, like, this is kind of arbitrary. It's just a kind of a band that I think is sort of comfortable for loudest can go just over it, and if you have quiet elements in the mix, if they're kind of messing around the left line, then they're not too quiet. Like I kind of use it like that.
What are you?
Like
can you let people know who might not know what's up with the pink noise? We've talked about it quite a few times, and I'm not sure everyone watching is familiar with pink noise curves to begin with.
Yeah, so a pink noise curve basically slopes off in power from the low end upwards. So the bass part of a pink noise is louder than the high end part. There's more energy there, but it corresponds to the Fletcher-Munson curve of how your ears respond to sound, and that means that your ears don't hear every frequency the same volume. There's it's sort of, you need to hear more bass the bass has to be louder before you hear it as loud as something in the mid-range. So the pink noise curve accommodates for that, which means that if you mix in with this curve and mix exactly on the pink noise curve, everything is kind of at a perceived similar level. So it's flat, but it's not flat because it slopes off. I think it's like 3 dB per octave or something. Like it's gentle.
It's 3 dB per octave.
Yeah.
I would love to get into that a little bit more of your thoughts about sticking too much to soothe and Gullfoss and pink noise curves or something, ruining the excitement of a mix.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you've thought about?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I deal with constantly, and I think it really depends on case by case scenario. I find myself sometimes not being bothered at all by soothe taking out tons of frequencies, and sometimes the moment it starts doing something, you're like, ugh.
Yeah.
And it completely depends on, but I wouldn't definitely wouldn't put that on like buses or like, I would be careful with that. Or maybe
At least a heavy hand.
Yeah. I would usually do that on individual elements, but yeah, it's easy to take a sound apart too much like that.
And I think it's going to become more and more a conversation as we get more like auto EQers and stuff like that, and auto or even AI analysis of your track.
Yeah.
What's it going to do? Of course, it's going to balance to pink noise, and it'll be like, well, at least it didn't hurt you.
Yeah.
But it's also it's not exciting.
Yeah.
So,
And it might bring out lots of, because obviously the frequencies of a sound can be pretty far spread out, even though they seem dense. If pink noise is, if an AI is going to pink noise your mix, it might like bring out all this shit in between that is not interesting. Or it's like, because like you see here, if you take these curves from certain people, there's big gaps in them, and that's maybe where they don't have the interesting information there. And if AI would mix that flat, it would bring out all this stuff that you don't really even want to hear.
I always think about how there's plugins now to emulate vinyl sound or tape sound or radio or MP3 compression, and a lot of those even have EQ curves to them. But I feel like currently, like, the meta in this generation of music production is reaching pink noise targets, which is almost like an era. Like, you could maybe think the 2010s through 2020s might be an era of like a very flat mix. But I can imagine, like, people getting tired of everything being refined more and more to this perfect flat mix.
Yeah.
And then seeking out like some kind of mix that is completely off kilter in some way.
filter.
Yeah, or like, I know a lot of people like a smile curve where the low end and the highs are both boosted a little bit. And in some genres, like especially like gent, I guess, like progressive metal, can be really scooped like that, and that can be desirable. And then even for us, like, our curve is pretty close to pink noise on the analysis, but I think that our sub bass tends to be quite a bit louder than a lot of genres typically are. But for us, all the interest is in the sub bass. That's the region that you want to be able to hear.
Yeah, like, that's why it's just a reference point, like a monitor speaker. But what you do with it is that's where you can make your expression and your statement. And that's when a genre can just be like, no, we're using lots of this and lots of that. I think that's still also pink noise in a way, like, because dynamics can also make such a big difference. If you listen to like American rap record mixing and the way they use dynamics but also flatten things and the way that sits in the spectrum, it's such a completely different experience. While you could maybe catch that in the same pink noise spectrum with some elements. If you compare that to like tear out dubstep pink noise, you might find that there's eventually a similar flatness to it.
Sure.
but
Overtime.
it sounds completely different. So I'm not afraid that something like this is going to lead to very homogenized mixing, because unless you're obviously reading it, if you're reading it wrong or too much, then yeah, you can overdo it, of course.
Just not using your ears, yeah.
Yeah, and you can overdo
use your
anything.
ears
Like,
for that.
OTT,
Yeah, exactly.
you can overdo a lot of things.
Yeah.
Very cool. We got a few more questions, Nick, if you want to take them.
Sure.
Dravico is wondering if you're able to change the color palette of the plugin, like maybe a light mode or something.
So I'll just play something now.
There's 10 colors. Like
Dog mode.
So
I'm all about that Predator.
I love this, even though it's very ugly. It's not aesthetically pleasing, but it creates so much separation between the sounds. And this is something I've been worked with for so long. Like the things that are red, they are like, the things that you need to pay attention to, or the things that eat up energy in your mix.
Nice. People were asking as well about you kind of saw it there, but I think Ternion, right? I'm saying it right, Ternion. Yeah.
Ternion.
You actually use the layout differently of Vision 4X, and Nick, maybe you can walk us through the different ways you can.
Yeah, I use the rotate button.
So if I rotate it, it's exactly what you want.
Let's see. Yeah, I use rotate, and then I also flatten the spectrum.
So flatten.
Yeah, okay. Which is so bizarre.
So this is what yours looks like.
Basically, but
what's the flat?
That way, when you have a pretty flat mix, the spectrum at least is just as easier for me to think about it that way. Because I guess it's closer. Because all flatten is doing, right, is it's doing that 3 dB per octave curve, or maybe whatever the curve is. It's shifting it.
Yes, but then wouldn't this be kind of straight? Wouldn't this pink noise curve be?
Can you load the album curve real quick? Am I using a different setting too? No, that is flat. That's what I was thinking. Yeah, you can actually see how much of a difference there is now that it's rotated. It's psychologically maybe easier to see horizontally.
Yeah. I mean, I totally get this. I used to use analyzers like this too, but I have to, like, I'm so attached to this guy that it just, like, it doesn't. I've learned to use this one this way, so that it is a little harder to read, but it becomes like it becomes like part of your what do you call the synesthesia, or like your experience of the sound and the visual.
Yeah,
it just becomes the same. It just takes time.
Yeah. I think when I have it on the master, I would have it more rotated. But if I'm doing sound design stuff, I have it more like this, because then I want to see more specifically the spectrogram.
And obviously, you can run multiple instances of it, and then you can just select one of the analyzers to completely fill the screen. So then, if you want,
I love that. You
can have this running, and then have another instance underneath that has the other analyzer.
Yeah.
I love the ability to change that, because you could load it up on multiple monitors and stuff too.
I sometimes have it like on both screens below there, and I'll have like a pre-master running there, and then I'll have maybe a mid-side one running there or something.
And it just looks cool when you take photographs.
Yeah. And you want to like almost mirror that screen, so the sound goes like that.
Oh, that's sick.
Or left and right,
Nick, would you say there's like an optimal resolution to the bar graph? I know you can switch that up in Vision, right?
That kind of depends on the use case, because if you're working on overall tonal balance, then reducing the number of bands is a good idea, because it will give you less detail on resonances, but it will give you an overall tonal balance. Like if I reduce this now while playing. it gives you a much more general idea of what the mix is doing. But if you're looking for resonances or a more detailed look, then obviously that gives you way more info on what the sound is actually doing. And if you move through it, you'll get a lot more information on what things are doing. But I generally have it somewhere in the middle, like what did I have it 60 or something like that. That's good enough for me, because it still will kind of highlight not individual frequencies, but it will still tell you that where a bass note is kind of sitting with high energy, for example. It won't just say like you have bass now. It'll say like what register it is in. And so this, you can see that this, what did we call it? We called it peak hold. No, it's not peak hold. It's the spectrum highlight thing. So it will, if something is playing for a longer time, it will change the color of these bars.
That's a bad thing.
Yeah. So that's an extra bit of information. So you see when this snare pops, you see it going red there for a second, but because it's a short sound, the whole bar doesn't go red. It just goes red there first. See? Move this a little so it's easier to see. So that pops out and goes red because it's over the thing, but it's not a long sound, so the bar itself doesn't become red. Now with the bass is constantly over here. That hangs, so that becomes red. So if you have a resonance that just keeps ringing, it will show up and color the bars like that. So that's a different it's almost like an extra little warning, like, hey, something is going on there that's taking up lots of power in your mix.
Is it a pain to load up the stems for Artifice? I want to see what that looks like now.
Hey, while he's doing that, I got a general question for you about your album. It was quite massive, right? How many tracks you said, wasn't it?
26.
And you have a curve. Did you, when you were mixing and getting ready, obviously you want them to sound like a group, like the album.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have the curve there? Is that the finished curve, or is that the curve you use to guide you to the final master of the projects individually?
That's what we were looking at, is the results of when I was doing the mastering, essentially.
Yeah, that's me taking all of the mastered and finalized tracks and then creating a reference curve out of them so that I could check new tunes that I'm making against our old mix masters to see how close they are to.
Yeah, and so when we were doing the mix down mastering and writing and stuff like that, really, it's just checking on a bunch of different analyzers and then doing car tests. And I was laughing when Jack and I were talking about the analysis, because he did that and showed us the curves. And I was like, honestly, the bass is a little hot because my car's sub sucked.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of funny too. Like, I love that part of art, where like those weird things, or like something about this room could influence your decisions while you're here. And like something about your old room would influence your decisions and stuff like that. So yeah. And it's almost like this is maybe a terrible analogy, but it's the way I feel about music theory. Music theory, like, you can apply an analysis and be like, okay, this is what happened. I don't always use music theory to write, but it's nice when you want to communicate about something, So that's how it feels.
Yeah, music theory is always descriptive. It's not like somebody went, classical music is written so and so, and then a bunch of people went, okay, that's it. It happened, and then people wrote down what they did. But it's really easy to get in the opposite mindset where you're like, well, but this is all the things that's written about music, so I'm sure that's how that's a prescription on what should happen.
Yeah.
So when you were mastering the individual projects, did you have a curve that you used, one specifically, or did you just kind of go with the feel? Like, what was the process? I think
at the time I was using Tonal Balance Control by Isotope. It has a bass music preset, and what I found with that one was the only thing I really check is the sub out of the gray line. If the sub's out of the gray line, I have learned from enough times of rejecting that's too hot. So that's all I really do. And beyond that, like, you can use like a little Gullfoss or something to see if it's doing a bunch of work. and be like, oh, and Gullfoss is basically an auto EQ versus pink noise, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, just a lot of like guess and check that way. But that's my favorite part of like tonal balance sort of rules like that is it's just, you know, I don't have the perfect monitoring setup either. So it's nice to have the little like, okay, am I at hour 6 of my session? Because then I'm going to rely on the graph a little more for this bounce than my own ears, you know, because now my ears are really tired.
Yeah.
And there's been so many times where it's like, I rendered a song, I think it sounds amazing, we take it to the club, too much bass, because I ignored that it went out of there, you know.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I, in
Yeah,
general, was
but
using
sometimes you do gotta have bass. It's part of like, those songs don't last long. They don't have shelf life, but
That one moment.
for one moment, you know. Exactly.
I just need one of these things to come out and hit me with like a newspaper every time. That's what I need. It's just a little.
Another reason why I started using the curve more lately is because I used to produce really loud. I'd have my monitors turned up quite a bit, and because I wanted to produce and feel more what it would be like live, you know, because everything we write is meant to be played live. It's, for me, listening at home is not as much of a desirable location, so trying to feel it. But lately I'm trying to be a lot more careful about my ears because of the hearing condition. And when you have your monitoring quieter, the EQ range changes, or like the Fletcher-Munson curve, equal loudness contour or whatever, it flattens more as it's louder. But then when it's quieter, it's not as flat. So I'm not used to mixing and mastering quiet. So I started doing, you know, producing and mixing, mastering, everything quiet now. And that's why I made that tune where the 3 to 5K was super hot, because I'm so used to that range being really loud.
To be more equal.
And yeah, and I had it cranked.
Yep.
So now I can see stuff like that.
Yep.
And reference.
Nice. Nick, I had sort of one more question about, you mentioned resonance, and we've talked about a few plugins already, and there are quite a bunch of plugins that have recently come out that just detect resonances and put an EQ curve there for you to remove them. How does one know if it's a bad resonance or if it's a good one?
Well, I think you know it because of one or two reasons. I think reason number one is something sounds wrong, and you're wondering what it is. Reason number two is you have Soothe open or something else, and it's telling you that something is resonant. And those are the two moments where you think, oh, maybe I should do something about it. But then what happens next depends completely on the sound.
Yeah.
Right.
You know,
But go ahead.
I have a kind of a thought, maybe, is because I do private lessons, and so people ask me about mastering constantly, and they're like, why can't I do what you do? Like, what's going on? And it's like a ear training thing. And I don't know. So I talk about pokey frequencies, which I think is the same thing as resonances a lot of times. And I think there's a bit of ear development that has to happen. And I think maybe it's like your ear starts to get good at deciphering, instead of just letting the song wash over you as like a mass thing. And you're just like, hell yeah. Like, you start to listen more and more and more and more in the same environment with controlled whatever. And then you can start to, maybe with your brain referencing other tracks you've heard before, know when something's out of balance. So there's like a little bit of a learning elements to this as well. Because, you know, this is showing you a lot of information, but I'm sure you got to work with these tools for a while before you know how to correctly...
Yeah, and it's a little bit complicated as well, because I find myself sometimes allowing for resonances or wanting certain resonances that I can't really explain based on, for example, harmonics. So I'll have maybe a snare or I'll have a bass with a resonance that actually doesn't add up in the harmonic series, so it's not tuned. It's not a tuned resonance. A tuned resonance would be something that you can argue, okay, my brain is going to consider this part of the sound, so I don't need to see it as an intruder in the mix. It's part of the... Okay, So then you might not work on it. But even resonances that aren't harmonically related to anything in your mix can sometimes be incredibly pleasant and welcome. I mean, when you have a mix, obviously there's multiple elements competing for space, and it's actually really great if sounds have resonances, because if those resonances are in different spots, you can use that whole spectral range to place all those sounds there. The only problem is if you crank the sound up and things start really shredding your ears, then then you have to, you have a problem. You don't want it to hurt your ears. It's us coming from dance floor music, from PA system music. You don't want it to hurt your ears. Not even on the monitors that are way not as good quality and will make it sound worse. You want it to. So I actually, me not having been in clubs as much as I used to, my mixing has become more resonant, more problematic, because I sit in this studio and the sound here is amazing, and I can get away with quite a lot more if I crank it.
That is such a can of worms about like listening environments, because like Jack was saying, like we mix and master our music for the club.
Yeah.
And that has different frequency responsibilities. Like I was even just talking to Buka's Finest the other day, and he was just like, yeah, and it sucks to use like pad synths, because sometimes they sound so distorted and piercing and stuff like that in like the club and whatever. And it's like, so you have to like, I back pad synths down, especially if they're upper mids, because I've just been in a bunch of clubs where it's just screeching, like old drum and bass and stuff like that.
Yeah, but that's a problem. You have to, deal with all these different systems. And if you're not dealing with those systems, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, I think
Don't play any.
I think the one thing that has changed is that I'm not sure how you guys feel about this, but I feel like the loudness war thing is a little different than what it was like before. Because I think the differences in loudness now, they're still there, and things will sort of dominate a little bit in a DJ set, but it's kind of subtle differences, and with the gain on the DJ mixer, you can easily compensate.
Yeah.
And back in the day, that wasn't the case. If somebody was playing vinyl and you showed up with your limited MP3s, they could never get, like, that's when drum and bass DJs, you would see them turning the EQ, everything up, just because of that level difference. So then, with that loudness war at the time, you needed to manage the content of the song in order to get it loud, and that would also include getting rid of things that would start distorting in an ugly way, which can also be resonances sometimes. You could, so that's how that's kind of started for us making music for PAs. And then you realize, okay, loud is cool, but we don't want it to hurt our ears. And recently, my mixing, I try to actually incorporate something that Sonny Skrillex calls crank factor, which is a mix that is loud, but you still want to turn it up, and you can turn it up. And a lot of stuff that is like really brick walled for just club play, no crank factor. A lot of stuff that's very bright and not dynamic in the mids and high mids and highs, no crank factor. And if it does, like, that's what the sort of US rap and some of the pop mixing is really good at. Like, very dynamic mixes, very loud bass, but dynamic.
Yeah.
And you just want to keep turning it up. That's the sort of mixing that I'm trying to get more into.
That's cool. I do feel like Loudness War was like, you had to do it, and it didn't care about tone.
Yeah.
And now I feel like if you're going to do it, it's about tone.
Yeah.
It's like a genre requirement versus like it's a creative move instead of like a absolute requirement.
Necessity.
I think.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
That's
And there isn't so you can't make such a big difference anymore with being loud in a certain way. You'd really make a genre statement if you suddenly decided that, okay, I'm going to make drum and bass, but the pads are going to be so loud because that's what it's all about. So it's going to be all because that's basically, it is this constant game of tilting where the emphasis is.
Yeah.
Remember when Pendulum came out and they put all that emphasis on the low end of a snare, the 200 hertz snare.
Yeah.
That was louder than the bass, and that was like a huge thing. And people were so into it, and had elicited such a response from people, and it was such a statement through mixing. And that shifts, then it goes to like, no, we don't actually want none of that 200 hertz because it just gets in the way.
It's like all claps now.
Yeah. It's muddy. Well, but back in the day, it was like, that's so fat. So that constantly shifts, and it's almost like a sort of statement sometimes to push something louder that's not meant to be that loud, and that sometimes creates like little subgenre pockets in.
If somebody in the chat wants to make tonal balance curves for the years of drum and bass, you could plug one in called like doof snare and like all that kind of stuff. That'd be really interesting.
There's so many different eras to mix downs.
Yeah,
it is really funny how that works. Even with dubstep too, the dubstep down has changed.
Yeah,
so much.
The snare thing, it's the same for the snares too.
Yeah, but that's just like it's. If I hear you guys play this and the snares, it's like. That it's liberating in a way that drum and bass has endured the same thing already years ago, but there was a time when it was all like, if it wasn't a synthetic 200 hertz heavy or 300 hertz at some point, synthetic snare, sine wave blip, white noise, full spectrum, blah blah blah, then it wouldn't sound right, and it wouldn't be, and that was the meta, you know. So I'm really glad that's not the case anymore, and I'm really glad to hear with you guys. You just use like, if it's got the right attitude, that's the criterion.
Yeah.
And that's something you can't see in the analyzer.
You won't get his style.
We got one last really good question that I think is worth addressing, and that is, October's wondering, when we're looking at Vision 4X and we've got the curve loaded and we see the red peaks, does that mean the signal is clipping, or does that just mean you've gone past the curve in Vision 4X?
Yeah, that's a good question. It means the latter. It doesn't necessarily mean the signal is clipping, especially in this case. Now, I've loaded up different stems just now, but I can... I'll just go back to the other ones just quickly. So you can see here... Yeah, this is where we were. So this is red, and this is all red and stuff, and this is red. But now you can... take this red here, this sine wave, you can see it moving on the waveform here, and it's not clipping because it's not there.
I think they meant there and on the far right over the curve.
Yeah. Oh, here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
move it to the left just a little bit for us. The UI just a little bit. Yeah. Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah. So this, if it's zero, theoretically, if you play a sine wave at 0 dB, it's not going to clip. But that's never really what your mix is doing. So if you have something right at this very edge at 0, it will probably introduce clipping, or it could. But that's why this headroom functionality is really, really handy. I use this a lot. So you can set this headroom here, and this will show you, I'm putting this before my limiter. This is important, before any master processing. So this shows me that whatever the signal is going into next is going to have to deal with these overshoots. And so that tells you that the bass here isn't clipping, but when this kick hits with the bass, you see that this is going red here. So you already know, without even putting a limiter on there or anything, that this is a potential problem. And if you're hearing distortion in your mix, you can usually find it in here, because that'll be what's triggering the limiter or a saturator or something. So that means that this would clip. This is running into the actual red. This is a visualization which goes red before it hits the level that it would clip at.
Nice.
But that also depends on how you calibrate it, of course, because if you set the range here to be, like I've actually got it set to 0, so the brightest is 0 dB, but like if you set it like this, then it looks like everything's clipping. And
so
I recommend it.
Was there anything else anyone wanted to touch on before we wrap up the stream and let you get on to your busy days?
Well, have you guys listened to their album? Because it's really great.
Absolutely.
Do it.
I follow you on Spotify now. When I got sent the link to you, yeah, it's absolutely great music.
Thanks.
How would you define, besides music that needs to be heard in the club, how would you define your sound? I mean, we got a little sneak peek to a loop of one of the tracks, but in general, for people who don't know,
UK influenced underground bass music, to be the most generic but fitting.
Yeah,
you know,
usually with a darker edge, but not always.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
The album is a really good, like, sort of all-encompassing piece of a lot of the flavors that we're really into. There's darker stuff. There's some more melodic pieces on there as well, and some tempos that we normally don't do, but we're excited about too. So
Yeah, I would. What I always say when I talk about them is that they are one of the few acts that I know that have a really cool focus on this sort of bridge between UK, European bass music and US.
Yep.
There's like the influences, it acknowledges a lot of the influences left and right and knows what they culturally kind of mean. So it's not just like sampling some shit and be like, oh, look, it's UK. Like it really acknowledges it and creates this really cool bridge, which results in really cool music as well. And I think it's really cool that happens, because how many times have I said really cool now?
Not
because
enough.
there's not a lot of acts that do that really, and I think you do it tastefully, and the mixes are interesting because your mixes don't sound like they're mixed by the guy who made the song. The mixes are like considered and well executed. And it's not like, how do you, I want to use all kinds of like things you can't say on stream, but sometimes an artist just like does too much to the mix, you know, like he like sort of over and
overproduced.
Yeah, and this restraint that you guys have, let's put it that way, the restraint that you guys have, I think, is also quite special. And also, given, you know, the history of American bass music and the sort of general history of electronic music that of becoming more complicated and more violent, you know, and the sound becoming more violent and more distorted and blah blah, then this is a great, you guys have like sort of calmed that down in a very beautiful way without losing like the fun and the energy and like so that's me gushing.
I'll take it.
thanks.
No, it's really solid. Really great music. Let's get a link to their Spotify, Connor, in the chat, please.
Yeah, please also link the Sleepnet EP. It's just out. It's actually more recent than their album.
Yeah, but I mean, the cultural significance, if you consider, it's pretty good.
Is there anything else you want to link to? I mean, we're throwing links in the chat. I don't mind at all.
It's fine.
Do you want to tell us about the newest Sleepnet?
Well, I did at the start of the stream, and actually, I've been really clammy about it on our radio show and stuff, because I actually just want the music to live for a little bit before I start talking about it.
All right. Well, when you're ready and you want to dissect a track, hit us up, and we'll have you on stream again.
There you go.
The invitation is open to all of you. It's been a blast, really insightful, and anytime you want to come back on, just ping the email, and we'll get it going.
Awesome. Perfect.
I think a good way to wrap up the stream is to make 4 people very happy by giving them a copy of the full version of Vision 4X. So I've got 8 names. We got 4 of you. I need 4 numbers between 1 and 8. No duplicates. So Nick, we'll start with you.
4.
4, okay.
6.
6.
8.
8. Okay.
Oh, difficult.
Hey, you gotta mix it up now. Come on, there's no pressure.
And 8.
Okay. 2.
He did not
All
mix it
even
up.
numbers.
Did not mix it up. Love that. Okay. The winners of Vision 4X, courtesy of Excite Audio, are if your name is called, email support@pluginboutique.com with your name, what you won, and a screenshot of you logged in here on YouTube. This is Chris Samurai. It's a B3, but it's not really a B. What would that be? It's almost like the German B.
German B.
Like the
Ringerlast.
Yeah, but anyway, that 3. Chris Zippy, Chris, and Posture.
Or Crispy Chris.
Yeah. So that's Chris Samurai, B3.
Yeah, we played on the radio show.
Crispy Chris, that's what that is. And Posture. Congratulations. You all win a copy of Vision 4X. Gentlemen, thank you so much again for coming on stream. It's been a blast. We learned a lot. We had some laughs. And I know you're all busy and you've got things to do, so I will let you go. But please get in touch again, and we'll do it again real soon.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure.
All right, everybody.
Peace.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
Keep on rising to the top. Ragamuffin keeps striving in every way. Hey, why? International, what they call we international. When me ride palm rhythm in the move, but the rhythm and I come down crucial. And me ride palm rhythm and then we sit down steady. Body me on the place I with the one Jamalski. We are the general. We sit up on the rhythm and open the mic incredible. I'll be right palm rhythm and I move, but the rhythm I sit down steady. Every ragamuffin you do, I feel rock and follow it. Cool, you know you love her for your life. We jump up on the rhythm, make we ride it right. We chat up on the mic and keep it international. Cause anytime we chop a mic, they call we give it a general. International, what they call we international. When me ride palm rhythm and I move, but the rhythm and I come down crucial. And me ride palm rhythm and then we sit down steady. Body me on the place I with the one Jamalski.